when is a good time to sell? Like that's a fundamental question. Is it because it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or how much revenue I should hit before I even think about selling? How many employees? Like what's been your experience and what would be your advice?
Yeah. So most of the entrepreneurs that I know of want to sell at the nadir, at the maximum spot, right? When their business is at the top, when, the economy's booming, when interest rates are low, like everything sort of comes together and they're like, that's when I'm going to sell, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs think that, we can time that. The problem is number one, no one has a crystal ball, and COVID has certainly cleared that. Number two, the best time to sell your business is when someone's buying it. I interviewed a guy just after I interviewed you, Dan. I interviewed a guy named Rand Fishkin. Have you ever heard of Rand?
No.
He wrote a great book. It's definitely worth picking up, called Lost and Founder. Okay. He started a company called Moz, and Moz, SEO Moz is software company, helps you do SEO.
Yes.
And Rand built it up to around $5 million in revenue. And he thought, you know what? I'm gonna just keep doubling the size of this business. When he gets a call from Brian Halligan, the guy who started HubSpot.
Yes.
And Halligan says, look, Rand, we love what you built. $5 million company. We want to pay you $25 million for it. So 5 times revenue.
Yes.
Most of which is cash, some HubSpot stock.
Yes.
Fishkin thinks, well, we're on this kind of trajectory. We're booming. We're at 5 million in revenue now. We're expecting to go to 10. Maybe we'll, kind of wait for a little while.
But get more afterwards. Yes.
Yeah. And so he kind of plays hard to get and says, no, we want 40. Halligan's like 40 for a $5 million company. No way. Can't do it. And so they split. And long story short, Fishkin's business starts to go into a tailspin. He personally, as he describes in the book and told me on my show, he went through a period of depression. Ultimately, he left the company. The business, he raised some venture capital instead. They used preferred shares, and ultimately, he was left with just some privately held company shares that may or may not be worth anything one day. And what's kind of an interesting postscript to the story, Dan, is that offer, based on the appreciation of HubSpot stock, would be $100 million today.
Wow. Yes.
So anyway, it's a long-winded way of saying we all want to time the business sale for the best possible moment. Yes. But the reality is the best time to sell your business is when someone's buying. And when someone calls you up and says, look, we like what you're doing, take that call, because you may never know when the next opportunity will be.
Do you also see that because business is it's different from a stock or different from even a home? Right? It's not like every single day you got someone come by and say, hey, I want to buy your business. You might, in 20 years, only have 1 or 2 people knock on your door and say, hey, I'm interested in looking into buying your business. This doesn't happen a lot. Even if we go out there and search and hunt and knock on doors and say anyone wants to buy, it's not like that.
Yeah, it's a very opaque market, to use sort of an MBA word.
It is.
There's very little activity. It's not like a stock in Ford or Tesla where you can trade it. You know what the value is any day of the night. It's a very opaque market, and there is not a lot of liquidity, and it's one of the reasons that I talk a lot about in The Art of Selling, this idea of trying to create a competitive marketplace for your company, because if you just get stuck in a proprietary deal, which is when you negotiate with one other company, it's a definition of basically getting hosed, because you're negotiating from a position of weakness. So, what I would counsel someone like Rand to do is take the call from Mark Halligan and at the same time see if there's another company that might be interested in acquiring you, and at least create some competitive tension.
Yes. You want a little bit of that walk away power, right? You don't want to be, if they walk away like, oh my God, I'm going to wait another 10 years and I'm not going to see another buyer that walks through the door, right? Even though maybe the second buyer may not be anything, or they may not even go through, but it's good. Hey, I'm talking to so-and-so as well. Let's see who's giving me a better offer, right? That makes sense.
And one of the things I spent a lot of time talking about is the use of a private equity group as a bit of a pawn in a negotiation. When I talk to entrepreneurs, and again, maybe Dan, you've had the same experience, they'll tell me that I want to sell to a strategic. right?
Yes.
And I don't like the idea of a private equity group. Sometimes they want to sell to private equity, but other times it's like, I want a strategic.
Yes.
And so what I counsel them is that's great to have an aspiration, but if you can also be attractive to private equity groups, most private equity groups are sheep. They have the same criteria. They want a business in a unique niche. They want a management team in place. They want a differentiated advantage. They want positive cash flow. Like it's the same stuff. And if you're attractive to one, you're probably attractive to 100.
Yes.
And so what I love to do is make sure that you've got private equity on your list of potential acquirers. And once you tick the box against their criteria for an acquisition, you can often find lots of different guys. And there you're into a real competitive conversation. And again, you've got to leverage when you're in a competitive conversation.
Correct. And you never know what cycle that private equity is in. Maybe they need to get money out. Like you just don't know. Maybe you say, hey, we just raised a whole bunch of money. We need to get the money out.
Yeah.
And they don't mind to pay a little bit more because they would rather deploy more capital than not deploying capital, right?
Yeah, for sure. And there's also this kind of hybrid somewhere in between where I refer to them as a strategic hybrid. Basically, they are a private equity company by legal definition.
Yes.
But actually they're doing a roll up. So they're almost acting a little bit more like a strategic. A strategic acquirer usually pays the most for your business because they've got assets that you can that they can leverage.
Could be a bolt on, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And I've got a situation I'm aware of where somebody's rolling up dental practices. And so the more practices they roll up, the more buying power they have.
Correct.
The better margins each practice can make.
Correct.
So it is a private equity group that's backed, but in many ways it's acting almost like a strategic acquirer.
Interesting.